Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Mermaid Vet Podcast. I'm your host, the practice manager here at Mermaid Vet, Tim Hobson, and my co-host
is Dr. Peter Mosites. Hi, everybody.
All right. Now we are jumping back into the talk about nutrition. This is part 2 of our series that we want to go into. The last episode, we spent time discussing why nutrition matters, different categories of pet food, such as wet, dry food, prescription diets. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that, please go back and take a look. It's going to be part 1 of pet nutrition. And go ahead and do that and catch back up right here. On today's episode, we'll be diving into pet food labels and discussing special diets for special situations. So let's get started. First things first, Dr. Mosites, can you break down pet food labels for us? So there's a lot of information on these labels, right? But tell me, what matters and what doesn't matter?
So I think one of the greatest things about pet food labels is that people don't realize is how much the wording matters. So words have meaning, and on pet food labels, that's especially true. And there's little kind of additive or qualifying words that we use in common conversation that don't mean a whole lot between you and I. If I were to say, I'm giving you an entree of beef, or I'm giving you a platter of beef, or I'm giving you beef, to us, I guess that's a really weird sentence, but in general, the vibe you get is that you're getting the same thing pretty much every single time. In pet food, that's 100% not the case. So based on how an ingredient is included in the name of a pet food tells you how much of that ingredient is actually in the pet food. So if you go to the AAFCO, the Association of American Feed Control Officials website, they actually break it all down for you really well. And it's something that I have to visit and revisit frequently because it's not something that comes up in our day-to-day life. Once you've picked a pet food, it's not something you're thinking about all the time. But while you're in that process, when you're being bewildered at the Petco food aisle, it's something that is going to be very useful to have on hand. So we'll start off with something called the 100% rule. The 100% rule says that if you have a name that implies that the named ingredient is the vast majority of what's in the food, it needs to make up 100%. So for example, 100% all beef jerky dog treats is the example that they use. They better be all beef. They better be 100% beef and nothing else that's in there. So usually jerky, you'll see it because it's just the dried meat. If you had something like Tim's chicken jerky for dogs, it better be 100% chicken. So that's the 100% rule. It tells you that if you're going to imply that something is just one ingredient, that needs to make up everything in that. So the 95% rule is just a little bit more lenient than that. What the 95% rule says is that if you had a food named, for example, Fido's favorite beef dog food, that named ingredient must account for at least 70% of the total product weight and at least 95% of the product weight, not counting water. If you had 2 ingredients listed, so Kitty's Delight chicken and rice cat food, those 2 ingredients together need to add up to be at least 7% of the total product weight, at least 95% not counting for water. So there's a little bit of leniency because a wet food, like we talked about in the last episode, is going to be a big part of that weight is going to be taken up by water. Now, the question then becomes, what's that other 5% of ingredients that's in there? And effectively for this, they have to be required for additional nutritional purposes. So that's going to be vitamins, minerals, and small amounts of other ingredients necessary for the formulation of the product. So it could be a preservative, something along those lines. So that's the 100% rule and the 95% rule. If you see foods that are like that, that tells you that the named ingredient is most of what you're getting. That's not most of what's out there. And that's where we start to get maybe not a little bit dicier, but a little bit less straightforward with what's actually inside the food. Next, you have the 25% rule. The 25% rule uses any kind of additional descriptors such as dinner, entree, platter, anything like that. So if you have beef entree for mature dogs or Tim's lamb and rice platter for puppies, what that says is that those ingredients need to take up at least 25% of the weight of the product, not including added water. So you've gone from 95% from Tim's beef dog food, 100% if you go Tim's all beef dog food to Tim's beef food down to Tim's beef entree for mature dogs. You've just lost 70% of the ingredients that are going to be something else in that case. So this is really important because when you're seeing that first named ingredient, there can be really wild differences just based off of a little descriptor word that's in the label. After 25% rule, we have the with rule. And what that says is that if you have Tim's dog food with chicken, that only needs to take up 3% of the weight. So Cynthia's Super Cat food with tuna and rice tells you that 3% of that food is either tuna or rice. The other 97% is something else. And then last but not least, we have the flavor rule. If something is labeled as chicken flavored dog food, beef flavored dog food, liver flavored cat food, it requires exactly 0% of that ingredient to be in there. So you can have the same listed main named ingredient on 5 different dog foods across the shelf, and they could have wildly different contents.
That's good to know. It seems like a quick, easy rule is like the less wording, the less tricky wording of the dog food or cat food, the more likely it is to be higher content of what you're looking for, right? Another thing that I see sometimes on the labels is something similar like guaranteed analysis. What do pet owners need to understand, or what is generally misunderstood about a guaranteed analysis?
So a guaranteed analysis has been a topic of conversation because it is a way for people's pre-existing myths about pet food to translate over to, it creates a justification for them. And some of the ones that you'll see sometimes is we talked about how much of the pet food on a dry weight basis needs to be a certain ingredient in the actual ingredients and labeling process. So you can see that same thing happen when you're using a guaranteed analysis if it's not on a dry matter basis. So again, obviously a food that is a wet food is going to have a lot lower everything content basically, because it's being diluted with water by weight. So if you're going off of just an as is basis and not a dry weight basis or a dry matter basis, one food might look like it's got less of a particular nutrient than another food. So it's going to be less protein filled. It's going to be less whatever the particular ingredient that you're looking for is. And it's not a one-to-one comparison. So that's a big one that I see. Another one is that pet owners will look for more and more protein inside of a food, with the idea being that more protein on the food label means that that food is going to be somehow better. That's not necessarily the case. So it's listing on the guaranteed analysis, it's listing the minimum protein and fat levels, not the actual levels. So you could have 2 foods that both say, let's pick a number, 30% protein by weight, but they're going to be wildly different in terms of their actual content. And in addition, their quality, their bioavailability, and their digestibility. So just the protein by itself on the guaranteed analysis is not a guarantee of what's actually in there. It doesn't tell you the quality of the protein, and it doesn't tell you the source necessarily either. So, for example, a protein that is a high percentage of peas, lentils, potatoes is not going to be the same nutritional value as protein that's going to be coming from a meat source like chicken or fish. So just remember, this is all run by corporations, and certain corporations are going to use the tools at their disposal to give a better or worse impression of their food based on what fits their need. So they're going to use guaranteed analysis just like anything else to push the story that they're telling about their food, or push the story they're telling about somebody else's food in the way that benefits them the most.
That makes sense. I mean, I know in our household, I get the high protein because anytime I need a little snack between meals and I'm lacking my protein intake, I can just eat a few kibble and I'm good to go.
Well, and I think another good thing to touch on with that, right? Because what you said makes me think of a friend that I had that was trying to get in shape, and he would eat protein, and then wonder why he was still gaining weight, when in the end, it's like we talked about before, it's still calories in, calories out are what cause weight gain or weight loss. There is a certain degree to which the source of those calories matter, but if your dog is eating a ton of really high protein food and not exercising, they are still going to get fat because the liver will convert that protein to another source of energy. If anything, you can actually do harm to your pet sometimes by having a diet that's too high in protein, because again, you're putting more stress on the kidneys, which stop all that protein in the blood from leaking out into the bladder, into the urine. And you're going to have more work for the liver, which takes that protein and converts it into something that the body can actually use. So it takes the protein, turns it into...
Well, good points. All right. So returning back to our pet food labels, right? So we've gone over guaranteed analysis. What would be the difference between that and just the ingredient list?
So a guaranteed analysis is going to tell you the percentage of a particular nutrient that's in a food. So what that food is made up of, how much of it is protein, how much of it is fat, how much of it is other minerals, which they pile all together in crude ash. And I think we'll touch on that later. Whereas an ingredient list is telling you where the source of those nutrients are coming from. So the ingredient list is going to go from, just like in human food, from the ingredient that takes up the most of the food, and then in descending order from there. So for example, if we had our beef formula or a beef entree, even though that beef technically might only be 25%, it might still be the largest by weight ingredient. And the other 75% is divided out into, more than 4 things. So they're going to be maybe 20, 15% each. So you'd have your beef first, and then you're going to have everything else listed after that. So the best way to think of it is the guaranteed analysis tells you the nutrients that are in your food, and the ingredients list tells you, to a degree, what sources those nutrients are coming from. Because like we talked about, protein can come from not just animal meat, it can come from a variety of sources. So that would be a great example of the difference between those two.
Very nice. Now, I want a small disclaimer on the next part of this podcast. I wrote this script ahead of time, considering what we'd be talking about. And then today I have the perfect candidate, right? So I put, we all think that the morbidly obese corgi that waddles when it walks is super cute, but it's safe to assume that dog might be slightly overfed. Hold on 1 second.
So for those of you understanding that this is a listening format, Tim has walked to the other side of the office. He is walking back with a corgi. It is a corgi. It is a fat corgi. It's tricolored. It's very cute, and it's very jiggly, not unlike Santa Claus.
Okay, I just happen to have the perfect example right here in the office. I couldn't turn that down.
I give a description because, podcasts are an audio medium.
That's too bad. That's
I guess that's the perfect plug. Watch us on YouTube. We're on YouTube as well. You can see our adequately appropriate faces.
So based off this, right? Again, people tend to think chubby cats and chubby dogs, oh, they're so cute, right? But that's cute and healthy are two separate things sometimes. Can you provide some very general feeding guidelines, just kind of get us on track?
Okay, well, yeah, absolutely. We can talk about the body condition score. So it's not necessarily a feeding guideline itself, but it is an outcome that we're looking for. So a body condition score is going to be on a scale of either 1 to 5, or more frequently in the last couple of years, we'll use 1 to 9. And the middle of that is going to be the perfect weight for your dog. So if you're on a scale of 1 to 5, a 3 is your ideal weight. If you're on a scale of 1 to 9, usually we're looking for a 4 or a 5. We have another YouTube video that you can absolutely check out. We'll link it if you're watching on YouTube right here in the card. If you're listening, then just make sure we'll put it in the show notes so you can link to it afterwards. But basically, a body condition score is you're looking for a couple different spots. You're looking from the top down onto your dog. And what you want to see is going from the hips into the waist, into the chest. You should see an hourglass shape. There should be a tuck there that tells you that your dog is at an appropriate weight. If they are more of a square, you're seeing flat sides, that's going to tell you that they're gaining a little bit too much. From the side, you should be also able to see that same tuck from the chest into the abdomen before you get to the back legs. So there should be a nice swoop up. In cats, frequently that's where we'll see that jungle pouch that forms. That is definitely a sign of being overweight. But if you had a fat cat that then loses weight, it's really hard for them to mobilize and lose that inguinal fat pad, is what that jungle pouch is called. So sometimes we have to ignore that a little bit. But that tuck from the top, the tuck from the side, and then the last part is you're going to be looking behind the elbows along the ribs. So in a dog, their elbows tucked right up into their chest. So you're feeling just behind that. And again, for those of you listening, we're on YouTube. You can see me jerking around my chest and poking behind my ribs. You're going to feel in that area to attempt to feel their ribs. If it is a dog that is at a healthy weight, what you should feel is something equivalent to the backside of an open hand along your knuckles. So you should be able to feel the ribs, that gentle curve that they create. If your dog is feeling more like a closed fist knuckles, that tells you that they're underweight. You shouldn't be able to feel their ribs that readily. And then on the opposite side, for most cases, especially in America, if they feel like the palm of your hand, that means that they're overweight. There's some wave form to it, but it's not very obvious. This last thing that you look for is you should be able to feel but not see a dog's ribs. Now, one of the things I'll say to clients when I do their body condition score, I'll explain this to them. I'll say it should feel like they have a t-shirt on over the top of their ribs. And then usually what I let them know is that your dog feels like he's prepping for winter. He's got a couple parkas on and he needs to lose some weight. The last thing that I'll touch on as far as guidelines for feeding, other than body condition score and doing that measurement at home yourself, and that's a great one that you can do at home yourself, is to make sure that when we're giving anything other than their primary food source, so anything other than their kibble, than their wet food, than their specific homemade diet, their subscription diet, any of the things we talked about in the last episode, that treats, human food, everything else should make up less than 10% of the total calories. So make sure that most of what your dog is getting, they're getting from their primary food source, because that's got the balanced nutrition that they need. Everything else, for the most part, is going to be empty calories or an imbalance, or most of the time, just a calorie overage.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that demonstration. Thank you for putting your shirt back on for anyone that's not watching YouTube video when he's poking his ribs. No. So I have one more thing I want to go over in this segment. Okay. And I've got just some small parts of it. So that we talked about AAFCO earlier. And there are particular AAFCO statements that can be included on the pet food. And I want to know, why do some of these matter? So let's go to the first one. The first one's going to be if it says complete and balanced.
Right. So if you are looking at a dog food, one of the most important pieces of information on that dog food is to look for the AAFCO statement. AAFCO, again, is the American Association of Feed Control Officials, and they are the organization in charge of basically regulating all animal food. So if you have a food that meets the minimum nutrition requirements for that animal, they'll have an AAFCO statement. And what it will say is that this food has been, I forgot the wording. This food has been approved for, I'll pull it up really quickly. All right. Blank is formulated to meet the nutritional levels established by the AAFCO dog or cat food nutrient profiles for. And then they'll also say animal feeding tests using AAFCO procedures substantiate that blank provides complete and balanced nutrition for, or blank provides complete and balanced nutrition for blank and is comparable to a product which has been substantiated using AAFCO feeding tests. So there's a lot to break down there, but basically what that AAFCO statement is telling you is that this food has been tested in some way or formulated in some way that it should meet the basic nutritional requirements. It doesn't mean it's beautiful or perfect, but it means that it should be able to get them everything that they need.
Okay. And another one you touched on was when you said it's for something in particular. So we also have sometimes it says for growth or for maintenance. Why is that important?
Exactly. So if you have a puppy, you're going to want to make sure that you're getting them an AAFCO food that is formulated for growth. If you have a older pet, you might want to be looking for maintenance. So that will tell you if it's for one versus the other, you may not want to be giving that food to a particular dog. So one of the things that we'll see pretty frequently is for a pregnant dog, we'll give them puppy food again because it's for growth. So looking for that indicator tells you it's going to provide enough nutrition to support them and support their puppies. The second part of what we talked, or what I mentioned there, is that differentiation between it's formulated to meet the levels established, it's been used in feeding tests to substantiate that it meets the standards, or it's comparable to a product that meets the standards. The best thing that you want is you want to have a feeding trial that's shown that your actual food does provide actually adequate nutrition for actual dogs. So that is sort of the highest standard that you can meet, is to say that this actual food has been used in a feeding trial. Now, giving that many dogs, that many different types of food that are on the shelf is that's a lot of dogs. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of testing. And so one of the ways that they have tried to streamline bringing a product to market without having to necessarily take a 6-month feeding trial for it, when companies are trying to move quickly, is they can say, well, hey, you've told me what should be in this. I can show you that this is in this. So based on science and your requirements, this food should work. And now, so that's a step down from actual feeding trials, but it is sound. The last one is to say, well, this food is pretty much the same as this other food, so we don't necessarily need to show you as in depth what we've done with it, because it's just close enough to justify that. Like if you change the flavor of a food, You don't need to do the whole dog and pony show again. You can say these foods are almost identical. We just changed one ingredient here, or we swapped out this ingredient for an ingredient from a different source because that manufacturer shut down, something along those lines. So it's not used super often, but that's the purpose behind it, is to say that it's almost the exact same food. So can we just sell it at this point?
I believe that's the marketing stance of Mr. Pibb for explaining why he doesn't have a doctorate like Dr. Pepper. It's like it. It's kind of like that, right? So, and let's go ahead and summarize this section, right? We've talked about in the beginning, we talked about some of the marketing and how the brands represented, and all the buzzwords included with them. And now we're talking about some of the AAFCO statements, right? So why would it be more important for you to focus on the AAFCO statement words as opposed to some of the marketing buzzwords you're going to see that are really going to pop and catch your eye on the shelf?
So what we're talking about here today are all of the regulated statements that are being made. So there's something that actually has to be backed by a test, backed by science, and there's consequences to lying about them. All of the marketing buzzwords are going to be basically anything else that they can say that comes as close to implicating one of these things, but that actually means nothing.
Absolutely.
So you don't watch Platonic, do you, on Apple TV?
No, I haven't seen that.
So one of the jokes in season 2 is they get Celsius and they keep saying it's clinically proven to function. What does that mean? It's clinically proven to function. It's Celsius. It's good for you. They wouldn't be able to say it if it wasn't good for you. It's clinically proven to function. That's how I feel about a lot of these marketing buzzwords for dogs.
I love it. As long as nobody questions it, they're good to go. All right. Then you just throw a celebrity behind it, right? Then you're really selling.
Rachel Ray.
Yeah, the Rock's new kibble. It's incredible. All right.
I'll probably buy that. He has French bulldogs.
Yeah, that's fair. But they probably eat a lot of protein. Let's see. So let's get into some special nutrition topics that we hear frequently from pet owners. The first one we're going to get into, we're going to start with food allergies, which is very common, right? So what are true food allergies versus environmental allergies, speaking of Frenchies?
So true food allergies versus environmental allergies. You mentioned that food allergies are really common in pets. They're not. So food allergies only really account for about 3% of the total allergies that we encounter in dogs, at least. So when a dog is allergic to something in their food, they're allergic to the protein itself. Now, that's not a question of the quality of the protein. It's just the actual base molecule that forms that meat or that whatever the protein might be. So if you have a dog that's allergic to beef, you can feed them chuck round, you can feed them filet mignon. It does not matter. They're still going to have an allergic reaction. So one of the things that I'll say first that I see mixed up is allergies with quality. There's an idea that low quality foods increase allergies, high quality foods decrease allergies. That's not a thing. If they're allergic to a particular ingredient, they're going to be allergic no matter what. But again, it's only about 3% of the total allergies that I see.
All right. So you stumped us with the fact, right? True food allergies only account for about 3%. Then why are most of these pets itching if it's not food related?
Most itching in dogs is going to come from environmental allergies. So just the same way that you or I can be allergic to pollens, to grasses, to different things, dust mites is a great example, to different things in our environment, dogs are going to be allergic in the same way. And so what we'll see is once that gets in their body system, either through their airways or through their skin, that they're going to start to itch from those environmental allergens. That's much more common than to see a food allergy. Other things that we can see that are going to cause it are going to be parasites, overreactions to fleas, things of that nature. But most of it is not actually the food itself. It can be, but most of the time it's not.
Fair enough. So, but let's focus now. Let's focus on this small 3% that are food related, right? What are things that you can do to their diet protocols that may help alleviate these?
So if you have a dog that you suspect has a true food allergy, what we need to do in most cases is to put them on a elimination diet protocol. And so what that consists of is you break everything down to either a single ingredient food. So back up to what we were talking, you make sure there's only one source of protein in that food, Or even better than that, you give them something called a hydrolyzed protein diet. So that's where protein is broken down beyond the amino acid level, or down to, should say, to the amino acid level, so that the body's not able to recognize it as an allergen. So protein is big enough to be an allergen for a dog, the actual molecule itself. Protein is made up of different amino acids. And so what hydrolyzing a diet does is it breaks those proteins down so far that it doesn't show up as something the body can recognize, but it still has that nutrient profile. Sounds expensive, right?
It does.
It is. So the downside with hypoallergenic food is that it's super expensive. It's one of the most expensive prescription diets that I see. And that's the reason for it, is that it requires all these additional steps in the manufacturing process. But that is the way that we can best find out if they have a true food allergy. Why this stinks so much, other than just the cost, is that while they're on an elimination diet, they can't get anything else. When you have an allergen or that you encounter, so something that is going to trigger the immune system, it doesn't start up and stop right away. It takes a while to go through the system. It takes a while for that body to settle back down. So if you have a food trial that needs to last 6 to 8 weeks, and 2 weeks into it, Uncle Joey slips him from some turkey at Christmas dinner and he's not supposed to be getting it, that's going to take about another 2 weeks for it to cycle back through the dog, for that dog to calm back down, for us to be able to get back to baseline so we can check again. So that the elimination diet has to reset every time they get something else until we can get 8 weeks in. One of the ways that we have difficulty with it as veterinarians is if that dog is taking a preventative, so a flea, tick, or heartworm preventative, that it comes in a chewable form that has some sort of protein source in them, which most of them do, then that makes our lives even more difficult too. We have to find a way to make sure that they're getting their preventions by switching it up to make sure that they're not getting something orally.
Small plug for the annual injection of Perfecto Quantum.
Yep.
All right. So the takeaway there is going to be trying your diet protocol of elimination, and you're doing it not around the holidays, and Uncle Joey is not allowed over the house. Got it.
Exactly.
Now, let's pop into weight management, which is also a very popular topic. We've already talked a little bit about the PCS, the scoring system for the weight, deciding how heavy or, healthy looking your pup is. But let's get into the actual weight management of it, right? So say the dog food, let's put it this way. Pet, somebody brings in their pet and they say, we ask, what are you feeding? How often are you feeding? And they go, I give them a cup of food in the morning, a cup of food at night. But they don't designate, right, what size this cup is. We're not talking technical measurement cup size. They're talking about like the big gulp cup, or they're talking about a 4-ounce cup. Why does it matter how much they're getting it, how big the cup size is that they're using?
This is a big one. This is also a big one that you see in the equine world or the horse world is, how big a scoop is. So they have it even tougher than we do, because a scoop is not a standardized measurement to my knowledge.
That's tough.
So the cup you're using matters, because when you're giving a cup, it means a traditional 8-ounce by volume cup. So one of the things that we have at the clinic, we have at Mermaid Vet Hospital, we have measuring cups that we'll send home with clients if they're on a weight loss program for their dog, so that we can make sure that we're getting the appropriate amount in there. You can use just a inexpensive dollar store kitchen measuring cup as well, but you want to make sure that you're using a standardized cup to give that food, because that's the calorie content that you're getting from the bag. That's going to tell us how much food your dog's actually getting. If they're getting a kitchen cup of unknown size, I can't tell you to give, I can tell you to give less, but I can't tell you what the appropriate amount is, because I don't know how big that cup is.
And so you're saying, again, it's kind of hard to decide how many calories, right, are giving in the serving. So how many calories would you just generally say most common pet weights actually need? Like, is there a rule of thumb or something, some quick guide to go by?
The formula that I use is going to be the weight in kilograms times 30 plus 70. That's kind of the quick shortcut. So for a 30 kilogram dog, which 66 pounds, so all my dogs are always 30 kilograms. That's going to be just shy of 1,000 calories. And then you can go from there. So a dog that is roughly 30 pounds is going to require just shy of 500 calories. A dog that is 15 pounds is going to only require like 250 to 300 calories. And so when you see that fat corgi, I'm guessing his healthy weight's probably around 30 pounds. He's probably 40, 45 right now. But when you have a corgi and you're only taking in 500 calories a day and they get a milk bone that's 80 calories, that's 20% of their diet. That's like us eating 5 Snickers. It's just a huge amount. So it's very easy for us to give them too much food on a consistent basis. And if you think, if you're giving that milk bone every day, it's going to add up over time for sure.
Oh, absolutely. You mentioned earlier about Mermaid Vet that we can give out the measured cups for anyone trying to get on a weight loss plan. What else can we do here? What are some other things that you do pretty regularly to help people with weight loss plans?
God, I was so hoping that you would say that. So if you go to our website, or ask this question, if you go to our website, themermaidvet.com, I actually spent some time with AI helping me do a little bit of programming and created a dog calorie calculator. I'll be working on the cat one here shortly, but what you can do there is you put in your dog's ideal weight, and then which if you're coming to the clinic, I will let you know what that is. And if you're using body condition score, you can also get an idea of what that is as well. But you put your ideal weight in, and then it will tell you how many calories per day your dog should be getting based on their activity level. So are they a pregnant dog that's young, that's going to have really high energy intake requirements? Or are they already an overweight dog that's got a pretty sedentary lifestyle, hangs out on the couch, doesn't do much? Then they're going to have a lower nutrient intake requirement. And then what I really like about it is you can look up the food that you're using, and it'll tell you how many cans or how many cups of that food to be given to your pet per day. So if there is, for anybody listening to this, if there is a particular food that you use and you don't see it on there, shoot us an email, info@themermaidvet.com, or drop us a comment on the video or on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you happen to be seeing this, and let us know what it is, and we can get that added for you.
Yes, don't forget, we are across almost all the socials, a lot of great information out there, a lot of free information out there. Please utilize it. And of course, show your support whenever you can.
Mermaid Vet Hospital, screaming into the void once a week since 2025.